Hi, and welcome to Network Scene, a weekly look at news and trends in wireless networks. I'm Kelly Hill, technology reporter for RCR Wireless News. This week, Sprint said it will turn down the U.S. cellular network in the St. Louis metropolitan area, plus parts of Missouri and Illinois, on October 31st in order to reuse the spectrum to enhance its own services. Sprint Nextel paid $480 million for those markets from U.S. Cellular earlier this year. And the purchase included spectrum assets in the 1.9 gigahertz band, and at close the transaction included about 420,000 customers. Customers will be affected if they don't move their service to Sprint or another carrier by the 31st of October. And Sprint is going to be making exclusive offers in those markets to entice postpaid customers to Sprint and U.S. Cellular prepaid customers to its Boost Mobile brand. Agilent Technologies launched a new line of modules for frequency extension on its signal generators and analyzers to support research on 5G wireless. The modules cover millimeter frequencies up to 1.1 terahertz, and they're designed for working with wireless backhaul systems and wireless standards that are still in development, like the IEEE 802.11ed, according to Agilent. Meanwhile, Azimuth Systems introduced a testing solution focused on user experience and device performance, as well as assessing network conditions. It's a software solution that allows unattended application-specific testing for user experience on smartphones and other mobile devices in the lab or in the field. And it's purpose-built for testing LTE devices in terms of pre-launch quality as well as in-market troubleshooting. You can read those stories and more on rcrwireless.com. For our guest interview this week, I'm joined by Peter Flynn, CTO of Volubill, which provides policy management, policy enforcement, and charging solutions to service providers. Prior to Volubill, Peter spent 16 years working for Swisscom Mobile, LHS, and SEMA Group in a variety of positions in operations and sales. Peter, welcome.
Hi, Kelly.
Let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about what policy is and the role that it plays in the network.
Okay, yeah, good question. If we look at policy, if you asked the question 2 years ago, policy was very much a defensive play on the network, where operators were having challenges with some of the heavy data hog applications coming along, and chewing up the bandwidth. So initially, policy was very much defensive. We saw things like fair usage quotas coming in, where people would be throttled after a certain amount of usage. But really, we've seen that evolve over the last 2 years quite significantly. Certainly today it's more about the monetization of that as opposed to the defensive play. We all see now things like booster buttons where you can, pay a certain amount and get a boost on the bandwidth for a period of time because you're watching a movie or whatever. And then, we're also seeing a lot of operators now working with some of the OTT providers in terms of, having a joint revenue share model to ensure content is delivered at premium quality. And then also more lately, we're sort of seeing another play, which is the enterprise play, where operators offering enterprise portals to larger customers to give them control of the employees. So quite an evolution over that period of time.
Okay. Now, one of the things that Volubill has talked about is the success of voice over LTE being in the hands of policy vendors. Tell us a little more about that.
So the success of VoLTE and LTE, I guess if we look at the change that's coming along, historically with the circuit voice, it's very difficult to actually control the quality of the experience there and generate revenue from that. If we look at VoLTE coming along, being part of the data stream, that pretty much means that you can apply the same set of policies, if you like, that we're currently seeing in the data world into the voice world as well. That becomes pretty exciting in terms of generating revenue. So for now, if we take something like voice calls, you can imagine we've all been to a football game or a concert where we come out of there, we want to make a call, network's busy, or we're at a railway station, there's a big strike on, or some other problem, we try and call network busy. You can start monetizing that. If you could offer small fee per month to have prioritized voice. That's a premium service you could sell, and bring in some additional revenue. Things like high definition video you could sell as an add-on with prioritized service, so you get not only just good quality of experience there, the users getting the high definition video, but also the experience is good as well. So I think that's sort of the key aspect with VoLTE coming along is policy really being able to bring some of the strengths we've seen in the data world and some of the new use cases to play.
Mm-hmm. And what weight do you think that operators are giving policy, given all the technical challenges that they're facing in some of these rollouts? I mean, LTE is we're combining 2G, 3G, LTE networks and a pretty complicated network evolution. How much are they thinking about policy?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think the answer is maybe not enough. I mean, if we think of it, I mean, it's so complex, the move to LTE, especially VoLTE as well. The technical challenges, a lot of operators are keeping separate networks, and we all know that the technical challenges of that in terms of dropped calls, customer experience as a result of that. So the operators got their hands full technically. We're also seeing, of course, the LTE rollouts being driven by the network departments and the operators, and they're so busy with that. Is there enough interaction going on with the IT and the sales and marketing departments in there? And I think the danger is that, because it's network driven, you could get a sort of like-to-like deployment on the 2G, 3G world in LTE. So for those operators that have embarked initially on policy from a network perspective, repeating that in the LTE world, when they come to monetize it, they're going to start having to think about, well, what does that mean, and potentially replacing systems. If they have the opportunity, it could be a good chance to step back and say, well, actually, we're in the new monetized world here. What does that mean in terms of my LTE rollout and supporting systems? And think of it end to end. I mean, right up to how does the customer's invoice look? Because what you have to do is make it transparent to the end user, the underlying technologies. And I think following up from that, it's really the bit that I think the operators need to think through is really the managing that customer perception throughout the whole process. I mean, we all know that getting VoLTE out there is going to be a 3, 4, 5 year journey by the time it gets fully rolled out, full coverage across the whole network. So how do you manage your customers during that process? I mean, the last thing you want to do is have customers getting dropped calls every second call they make. That just results in poor perception and churn. I think the other aspect there as well is, of course, with VoLTE, you start bringing along some new offerings, enhanced video calls, etc. If you're going to bring them into play, you have to be sure that you're going to have the sort of same quality and same experiences, some OTT players out there already, like Skype. So managing that whole customer experience is a key thing the operators need to look at as well.
Can you talk a little bit more about how the role of policy has evolved in terms of, over time with 2G, 3G, and now in LTE?
Yeah, I think, in terms of 2G, 3G, LTE, they're just network technologies, and sure, with LTE you get some additional capabilities. I think the way that the policies have advanced in the last year, especially, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of, OTT revenue share models, some of the different use cases to generate, to monetize that, they're all transferable easily to the LTE world. And again, the key thing is going to be transparency to the end user. Customer buys a certain package or whatever, they don't care whether it's LTE or 2G, 3G, as long as the quality of experience is there, of course. So, I think it's more a case of, on the VoLTE side, is again the benefit of the fact that you can apply what's been learnt in the data use case side to the voice side.
Let's talk a little bit more about that for a minute. And can you tell me some of the monetization strategies that are possible now that maybe weren't before?
Yeah, I mean, if we think of the monetization aspects, I mean, I mentioned earlier on the VoLTE side, of course, is the idea that you're at a football game, you know, your team's won, you call your dad because it's the first time in 6 games they've won, and you can't get through because it's that the network's busy, you know. So the opportunity to have a, you know, even if it's $1 a month or whatever, where you get a premium, you know, prioritized calls, you know, that might be something, you know, heavy football game or concert goers might easily buy up to. You get an extra bit of revenue there. I think there's the high definition video side. You know, you could have an offering of high definition video that's prioritized. So again, the quality of experience side. Also, I think obviously now, because you've got the voice side in there eventually, there's things like, you know, mentioned earlier about enterprise, how a lot of operators are looking at portals they can offer to enterprises. So enterprises can control, you know, their employees, the departments. They can set department quotas, individual employee quotas, get alerts when limits are being hit. You know, a lot of power if you can have both the voice and data being managed in that way. And then I think there's sort of another use case that sort of may come into play as well, which is it's something you know, we've seen across in China, which is and you know, it's you know, moving into other parts of the world now, is things like quota transfers. So the fact that, you know, if you've got some unused quota, you transfer it to a friend or whatever for a small fee. So you can imagine on the VoLTE side, you've got some unused minutes, you transfer them across to a friend, you know, for a small fee. The good thing there is the end customer thinks they're getting a great deal because they're helping out a friend for a small fee, and the operator's, you know, getting a little bit of additional revenue. So, you know, a lot of different options there.
Mm-hmm. One interesting point that you brought up when we were chatting beforehand was some played into some things that I've been writing about recently in terms of network analytics and the use of data from the network for network planning purposes, you know. And I know JDSU recently put out a report on the possibility of network operators being able to, you know, package some of the data from their networks and sell it to different verticals who might be interested in knowing, well, you know, so many customers between, you know, male customers between the ages of 18 and 25, you know, we're at this location, you know, 3 days this week. And I'm interested in hearing about policy and the opportunity there in terms of network planning for the operators to better understand their own customer needs.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you know, analytics is in there now. It's, you know, an increasingly important element in the policy chain, if you like. You know, if we think of it right from a planning perspective, if we think of all the elements in policy and charging, you know, right down on the network with the TDS, PCS, DPIs, you know, right through to PCRF, OCS, not only have you got the real knowledge of what's going on the network, what applications are being used, but perhaps more importantly, you now have the understanding of who's doing it, when and where they're doing it. So that becomes sort of interesting if you're looking at the rollout of VoLTE, for example. You know, if you've got the profile of your customers, a profile of the usage, and you're trying to work out, well, you know, how do I migrate subscribers onto LTE? The last thing you want to do is migrate somebody across who lives on a fringe of an area where you've rolled out LTE in an area where you haven't, because they're permanently going to have dropped calls. Whereas if you've got a set of subscribers who are in a city centre where you've got good LTE coverage, who make, you know, 99% of their calls there, then they're prime candidates. So I think if you bring those elements together, it could be a very useful tool in planning the sort of migration and the rollout of LTE. I think the other aspect in there as well is, you know, once you start rolling the LTE network out and want to encourage users, you know, onto VoLTE, you know, there's a lot of tools available in policy there as well. I mean, just the whole bundling aspect, you know, the fact that you could offer bonuses, you know, you get an extra 30 minutes in a bundle if you switch to LTE, you get 100 megabyte data for X minutes of voice if you go into VoLTE, or free video calls for a promo period. I mean, that's great because you also show them the benefit of going to VoLTE with additional services, rich content services. But also, once the promo period's over, comes a potential revenue generator if the customer wants to purchase that and continue using that service.
So along with the network evolution from 3G to LTE, we're also seeing Wi-Fi become a more integrated part of the network. How does that change things, or how does that affect things on the policy side?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. We have to be careful here because people are talking about 2G, 3G to LTE, but almost you can think of it. You know, you need to almost forget that and think about it being multi-network. You've got Wi-Fi offload in there. You're using the fixed network, you know, WiMAX or whatever. And you know, but especially Wi-Fi offload is something a lot of operators are investing in and looking at. So the question is, can you really make best use of that? Now, the great thing with policy is, you know, policy by definition, you can actually make sure that, you know, you understand the subscribers, and when you understand the subscriber policies or their usage, their packages, you can push that policy out to any network. So if you've got a network out there where you know you've got 2G, 3G, LTE, and some Wi-Fi offload sites, you can just push out to a Wi-Fi gateway as easy as pushing to the 2G, 3G, or LTE network. And that ensures you really get the true QoS or the true policies replicated across the different network elements.
Okay. So I think I also wanted to ask in terms of what issues are operators likely to run into if they don't put enough thought into policy amid all of these technical challenges of more complicated networks to manage and operate?
Well, if they don't put enough thought into it, as you mentioned, there's a sort of technical aspects where the you know, the end user experience, you know, especially with the drop calls aspect, you know, there's a serious risk of churn if not enough thought's put into the planning, the rollout, how you manage the transition of subscribers. You know, that's clearly a risk. I think also the risk there is something we talked about earlier, which is the monetization aspect. If you don't step back now and say, well, what's my landscape going to be? How do I want to manage customers now and in 2 years' time? The danger is you invest in a set of systems that you very quickly need to replace, you know, 6 months to a year's time. So I think that, you know, the operators really have to look carefully at that.
Mm-hmm. In terms of VoLTE, you know, I've talked with different folks across the ecosystem who say, you know, it's imminent. We're going to see, you know, much more widespread deployment by the end of the year. What's your perspective on the ecosystem and where we are in terms of getting to more VoLTE being in the network and being available?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously predominantly most operators are you know, focusing on LTE from a data perspective, and, you know, relying on the circuit switch fallback for the voice. You know, I think that's certainly going to be the case the next couple of years. But you know, we have to be ready when VoLTE really starts rolling out. And again, that goes back to the point, you know, thinking ahead. If you don't think ahead with VoLTE, you're going to invest in the infrastructure today. You're going to be fine for 1-2 years, and then as soon as VoLTE comes along, you're going to have to start rethinking some of the decisions you made.
Mm-hmm. So, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that you tell operators about the importance of this in order to get them thinking that, you know, this is something I need to be thinking about now, you know, not just in terms of my you know, technology trials for VoLTE, but also thinking about how things are going to work in regards to policy in the back end?
Well, I think the number one aspect is, I think ultimately we're on a road to convergence here. We look at what's happened in the data policy space. You know, we had the 2 elements, PCRF and OCS, the policy and the charging aspects. You know, they've came together because policy and charging belong together. Now what we're seeing is a sort of convergence of that data aspect with the voice aspect. So that's the journey that the operators need to go on, is the full voice data convergence being there in 2, 3, 4 years time, with all the benefits that brings. I think the other aspect as well is the other strength that in the world of data is there's been a lot of investment from a policy perspective, which is how do you manage your customer end to end? Because policy isn't just about a set of network rules. It's really the policy of who is your customer and how do you manage them, right from when they're purchasing their initial packages, they're subscribing to those packages. How do you manage that experience? What's the self-care portal like? How easy is it to use? How do you track the usage? How do you track the quotas? Right through to the dialogue with the customers. If they're using a service, they're getting close to a quota, how are you interacting with them? SMS, email, notifications. So the whole, a lot of focus has been spent in the data world on that whole customer experience piece. And that's another benefit, as VoLTE comes in, that's naturally going to slot in. That's great because the end user effectively has a single touch point, if you like, common sort of usage, sense of feeling, whatever. And of course, the benefit from the operator perspective is reducing the number of systems as well.
Okay. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. I've been joined by Peter Flynn, Chief Technical Officer of Volubill, which provides policy management, policy enforcement, and charging solutions. Thanks for your time today, Peter.
Well, thank you.